Fantastic, wonderful. Any other, whilst we're on the tea or beverages, any other top tips we've got that people?
But if you actually want to use tea bags, PG Tips and Clipper don't use plastic in the bags anymore.
Oh.
And I'm using Clipper at the moment.
Me too.
Great.
I've heard that Plackley tea is very good. Not that it's made in Plackley, which is near here.
Yep.
I had some. I said, "Oh, what is this tea?" And it says it's called Plackley tea.
Yeah.
It's very good
Very
indeed.
nice.
I use that. I use the loose leaf of that. I recommend that too. And you can purchase it at the stable stores just down the road. If you're not in Britain, do take a trip down and sample the Plackley tea there.
Yeah, we found that it's the best tea.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point at which to hand over to Ruth. I'm just so appreciative of you joining us. I first came across Ruth in West Sussex, speaking at a Deanery Evensong in Warnham, I think it was, and just really inspired. And actually my thinking, I can really recognize from that point changed quite significantly. And it feels a bit like Ruth has kind of come with me on the journey, because when I arrived here in February last year, we then had the Lent course. We were all primed and we did our first couple of sessions. We bought our books, we started reading them, and then lockdown. And it's sort of been in the background. I thought, we can't let this go. This is so important. And we then actually brought it in for our Lent course this year. And it was really exciting. There was a real appetite to get back into, you know, these important matters. And it's a delight to actually have Ruth here in person, just about, with us today, and love to hear what you've got to say to us. That wasn't Ruth. I thought it was Ruth gone. Hopefully they'll come back in. But over to Ruth. Thank you again.
Thank you. Well, the main aim of this morning really is for it to be a coffee morning.
Sorry, can I just stop you one moment? I'm going to mute everybody. Ruth, could you unmute yourself? Okay, is that all right?
Yep, sure.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, good idea. It's helpful if everyone's on mute, isn't it? Yeah, so the main aim for this really was just a coffee morning, that I was going to come in and join you and say hello and be available to chat and answer any questions or hear from you or what have you. But very happy to say a few things before that, and just delighted to meet Pete through email and to hear that some of you have been reading Saying Yes to Life. It was a very strange thing last year with lockdown coming in exactly halfway through Lent. So there'd been this fantastic momentum being built up around the book, with churches all around the country, not only Anglicans, all sorts of churches. And you probably know the Church of England's Lent campaign was all focused on it as well, which was just brilliant. And then halfway through, the legs got cut off it. Then gradually after Easter, as people picked themselves up off the floor, people started to read it again. Obviously, it doesn't have to be read through Lent. And I began, well, for months, I had a steady stream of people contacting me and saying, thank you so much. They didn't have the headspace to read it but over Easter, but then they picked it up afterwards. And it was just so prescient, the kind of things that it was talking about. One woman wrote, say it got her through lockdown. And then this year, to my surprise, I've been hearing from lots of churches who decided to look at it this year. So it's been really encouraging to me that all of my efforts in putting it together haven't been lost, but there is still fruit from it. It's just been happening in ways that clearly I would never have expected. So I thought I might just give a brief overview on why should we be thinking about issues of climate and wider environmental things. I really hope, if you haven't read the book yet, I really hope that you do. It looks at all of this much more and in a much more creative way, using Genesis 1 as the basis for the explorations that happen in the book. But I want to give you 4 very simple reasons why such a book looking at issues of global poverty and environmental concern was asked for by the Archbishop, and why it's something that is a Christian concern. I'm going to, I was just about to share my screen, but it says that the host has disabled participant screen sharing. Sorry, do you need to make me a host? I should have thought of this before.
Hopefully you can now. Give that a try.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you. Right, is that sharing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Let me, hold on, get some of those notifications off. Can you see those notifications I'm clicking? I'm never quite sure exactly what you can see and what you can't. So 4 things that I want to look at. Firstly, for the sake of the world, I think it hardly goes without saying that our world today is facing extreme problems and extreme issues, and is groaning, to use the biblical language, and really struggling. And I've put up on this slide just a variety of different pictures that illustrates that. I'm not going to take time today to go into all of it and give you all the facts and figures and so on, but just some of the issues there that these pictures highlight. Importantly, I wanted to put in the bottom middle picture of the sparrow, because when you look at some of the others, the rhino and the coral reefs, it can feel like these are issues thousands of miles away. This is only impacting the natural world in other parts of the world. You know, as I sit here and I look out on my lovely garden in the sunshine, it's hard to remember that actually this is also impacting the natural world here more closely. And the UK is actually one of the European countries with the least amount of remaining natural ground that's there, and we face big problems with species extinction, with the erosion of waterways, with our woodlands and forests being cut down, and leading to flooding and issues that we have seen. So this isn't only something that is many miles away, this is something closer to home as well. But the natural world is struggling. And so for the sake of the whole world, for the sake of ecosystems and species, we want to be acting in ways that look after and that take care of this world. And climate really is at the heart of that, because we know that our climate crisis is having a devastating impact on the wider natural world. And then now I need to work out how I change this. I don't actually know. Aha, there we are. It's a miracle. You would have thought that this bit I would have got used to, but I actually normally ask someone else to screen share my PowerPoint so that I'm not faffing around with it. But anyway, so secondly, for the sake of people living in poverty, and at Tearfund, we hear and we see day in, day out, the impact that the environmental crisis and the climate crisis is having on people in the poorest communities around the world where we're serving. And again, I've just put up some pictures there that illustrate some of the problems that are there. But I think of a woman for who I was reading about recently in the northeast region of Ethiopia called Orbisa. And they used to have regular rains and regular water. And now she, with her family, has to walk 10 hours every day to collect water for her family needs. Can you imagine if I had to spend 10 hours every day collecting water? I wouldn't have the time to be looking after my family properly, to be growing the crops that I needed, to be doing the work that I needed to do to earn a livelihood. It really impacts people. And Orbisa is just one woman, but I could tell you story after story after story about the impact that our climate crisis is having on people living in poverty. And this is really important because sometimes we can see the environmental and the climate crisis as something that is as something that is exclusively about the wider natural world. And we forget that we are a part of the environment. We are a part of nature. You cannot care for people living in poverty without thinking about the land they live off and the seas they fish in and the air that they breathe. And you cannot care for the wider natural world without thinking about the people that share that space and who impact it, whether through their extreme poverty or our extreme wealth. And so the wider natural world and people, we are part of the world. And so caring for the world and caring for people go absolutely hand in hand. Then for our own sakes, because we know that our own well-being actually is linked with the connections that we have with the wider world. And we know that the environmental crisis and the climate crisis isn't only impacting people in poverty, it's also impacting people such as ourselves through things like flooding, through the terrible wildfires we've seen in California and in Australia. But the pictures that I've put up here are around our well-being, and haven't we rediscovered over the last year how important our connection with the natural world is to our well-being, as we've got out, those of us who've been able to got out for our daily walks, enjoyed nature, enjoyed hearing the birds singing, enjoyed the clear skies without the airplane trails and so on. And this is very biblical, because we are Adam. We've been created from the Adamah, which is Hebrew for earth. We are earth creatures. We're not separate. It's not that the environment is over here and people are over there. We are part of the community of creation. And we are harmed when the wider natural world is harmed. So for the sake of the world, for the sake of people living in poverty, for our own sake, but then underlying all of that, of course, for God's sake. And this is where I would love to point you even more to saying yes to life and to some of the other things that I've written, because I'm not here going to give you a full biblical theology around wider creation care. But we do see running throughout the whole scriptural narrative this theme of the wider natural world. And Colossians 1:15-20, that beautiful song there, that beautiful poem, if you like, where we're told very clearly that Jesus' blood was shed on the cross, not only for human beings, but for all things in heaven and on earth, that all things might be reconciled to God. So God's plans for reconciliation, for salvation, for redemption aren't only about humans, though we're a key part of that, but they're about the restoration to God of all that he has made. And that really is based on the fundamental assertion in Genesis 1:31 that God looked at this world and he said it's very good. And that's all we need to know. God looks at this world and he loves it. He thinks it's fantastic. And therefore, as followers of God, don't we then want to look after and value something which is so valuable to him? So that's just a little bit of framing for you around why I am so committed and spend so much of my time trying to communicate and help churches engage with taking care of all that God has created, humans as part of that, but not only humans, holding together human needs and the needs of the wider natural world. There's loads more that I could say about that, but I'm going to stop, I think, and just open it up to us for discussion, comments, questions.
That's
wonderful. Be great to hear from you.
Ruth, thank you. That's really helpful. Would you just say something about your, sort of your personal, what kind of got you and the difference that, you know, sort of, is this something you've always had an inkling about, or kind of come to more recently? And just a little bit about that, and then it'd be great to fire some questions at you.
Yeah, sure. So there were two things that happened at the start of my adult life, towards in my sort of gap year, early years of university. One was that I came to a fresh realization of God being a God of justice, and that the theme of money and the theme of poverty and the call to be spending ourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfying the needs of the oppressed, all of those, that strong theme that we see there in the scriptures, I hadn't really, hadn't been an emphasis for me up until that point. So I came to a fresh understanding that actually being a Christian, a really key part of being a Christian, was being engaged in issues of poverty and injustice, however that might not be, you know, in your professional life, however it might outwork, but that actually you can't be a Christian and can't be part of the people of God and not be concerned for poverty and for people living in poverty. And for me, that outworked itself locally. So when I was at university, I spent quite a bit of time with people on the streets, sort of helping them get into some shelters and things, but really quite a lot of time just sitting on the pavements and hanging out with them and understanding a bit more of their lives. And then it began to take more of an overseas angle, as well, as I learned about international poverty and what was happening elsewhere in other countries. And then at the same time as that was developing, I've read a little book that someone wrote that opened my eyes for the first time to how the Bible has a lot to say about environmental care. And I just hadn't, again, that was an aspect of my faith that hadn't really, that wasn't there for me while I was growing up, particularly, other than a love for the natural world, but not a clear biblical understanding as to why we should be taking care of it. And so those two things really came together powerfully, and I realized that there were these aspects of my faith that were missing and that I needed to be building in. So I set out really from my early adult life to try to live my life in a way that did as little damage as possible, and maybe even helped, but that did as little damage as possible to this amazing world that God has made, and to all of its inhabitants, both human inhabitants, but wider inhabitants as well. And so that then set me on a path of thinking, reading, joining organisations of both biblical reading and sort of informational reading, and joining organisations like A Rocha and Friends of the Earth and others, and just increasing my knowledge and understanding. And I was in a position where I could begin doing some writing and some speaking, and so it went from that.
Thank you, Ruth. That's really helpful. And I've got loads of questions. I'm sure all of us do. If you pop your hand up, either the reaction hand or physical hand, I will unmute you, and let's send some questions to Ruth. I can't quite see everyone at once, so I will, if anyone else spots someone with a hand up, and I shall try and access you. Who's going to go first? Sue Crow, are you?
I've unmuted myself according to this, but is that right?
Yeah, go for it.
Go for it.
Go. Oh, good. I haven't got my hand up though yet.
That's fine. All good. All good. Yep. Question, Sue.
No. Let me think.
Okay. Oh.
I didn't have a hand up.
Fine. Okay. Judy, lovely. Yes. If you can unmute, or I'll unmute you. I think you need to actually. It's not.
Yeah, doing that.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Ruth, I found your book really impressive, and I have read the whole of it, although I forget quite a lot of detail now. one thing that struck me was the cross-cultural references which you have, which you don't always find in a Christian book, which are very illuminating. And slightly linked with that is really my main question. How did you select your interviewees, and was it difficult to do so? There's a terrific variety.
Yeah, thank you. So the brief that I got from Justin was that he wanted me to look at issues of global poverty and environmental care, because it's etched in my mind, and for it to be theologically rooted and global in scope. So there we go. That was my brief. Go write a book from that. So I'm really glad you noticed, I worked really hard to give it a global dimension. I wanted it to be able to be read by someone from any part of the world, really, and see something of their context reflected in it. So worked very hard to make sure that it had that there. And then, are you referring to the online, the interviews, the face-to-face interviews?
That's right, yes.
That I did, yeah. So then, for those of you who don't know, I thought to give it some added value, each chapter is accompanied by an interview with a high-profile person, an expert on the particular theme of that chapter. So whether it's water or sun, moon and stars or something. And really I just kind of thought and worked out who would be the best people to do that. And reflecting your first point, I really wanted it to be diverse. So wanted to make sure I had a good mix of both women and men, and then from different nationalities. So didn't want all white participants or all white interviewees. And thought, well, I'll aim for the top and then see kind of work down from there and see who I get. And thankfully everybody said yes. So I had some amazing experiences. I had the enormous privilege of interviewing Christiana Figueras, as you will know, who was one of the architects of the Paris Climate Agreement. She's from Costa Rica and just an incredible powerhouse of a woman. And her interview was just brilliant. In fact, funnily enough, we did the interview in the hotel room where she was staying in London. And we ended up talking about tea as well, because she bumped into her in the foyer as she was popping out to go and pick up some, I think it was PG Tips, because that's her favourite, and she wanted to get some while she was in the country. And her hotel room had all these fancy teas, and she didn't want any of that. She just wanted some of our cheap and cheerful tea. So she was amazing. And they all were. The other person who really sticks in my mind was Professor Sir Martin Rees, the Royal Astronomer. So I went to his house in Cambridge and interviewed him, and he was absolutely mind-blowing. I don't know that the video that's there fully captures it, because we had a long video, a long interview, and I would say I probably understood about 10% of what he was talking about. Just incredible. So that was an amazing privilege to interview him. So it was just thinking who would work well for the chapters and wanting to make sure that there was good diversity there as well.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Ruth. Other questions? Practical, theological. What do we want to ask Ruth?
Hi, Ruth. Do you think we're making any progress, churches themselves, in becoming eco-churches? Is there any evidence that, lots of churches are taking this on board?
Yeah, there is actually. And certainly in the UK, it's really encouraging. And certainly within the more traditional type churches, I think we're a lot further back with the more networky type churches. So there are some that are making good strides there too. So I think are you all familiar with the actual eco church scheme?
Yes, we've got in fact Sophie, who's is one of our champions. So we're in the early stages. So we're nearly at bronze, something?
Yes, so we just have to go through, check all the answers are relevant to this year, and then submit it, and then hopefully we'll get a bronze, which I think we are going to get.
Congratulations. Well, you'll be joining, I don't remember what the figures are now, but there's something like 3,500 churches that have registered with Eco Church now. Over half of the Church of England diocese, all of the Church of Wales diocese. And when, I don't know, you might not know, but I started it back 5 years ago. And when we started it, before I worked at Tearfund, I was with Arosha, and our aim was to get to 10% of churches within 10 years. So we reckoned that in terms of creating a tipping point that would then create that movement that would bring about change, that a tipping point, you want to reach about 10%. So the scheme is for England and Wales. I think there's about 40,000 churches. So our aim was to reach 4,000 churches in 10 years. So I was hearing recently that we are now nearly at that, some years early, so they're upping their target, and I think they're now going for 15% of churches in 10 years. I might have got that wrong, but I think that was what I was hearing. So things are really encouraging, and the Church of England's recent thing at Synod around looking to be net zero, or looking at what it would mean to be net zero by 2030. You know, there really are good strides happening. That is not to say, of course, that we are there. And you will know just from your own church and from family and friends in churches elsewhere, we still do have a long way to go. And we're nowhere at the point where the whole of the church in the UK has got this, and there are still churches and denominations and networks where this isn't an issue, and so there's still a lot of progress to be made. And then, of course, when we look beyond the UK and look into other countries, some of the countries that we work in as Tearfund and others, we know that we've really got a long way to go. So there's kind of encouragement, but challenge too.
Thank you. Great. I've just seen another hand up. Henry and Nikki.
Hi, Ruth. I was just going to say, I mean, I thought that interview with Sir Martin Rees was absolutely brilliant. Actually, it was fascinating. I wouldn't mind looking at it again, and perhaps I will. But I'm pretty certain that he was also talking, wasn't he the one who kept saying that actually, ultimately, the power is in us to change politicians, I think. And I was just reflecting on that as you were reminding me about that interview, and was wondering what you personally and Tearfund, and then what we can do in terms of lobbying either before or during the Glasgow thing, and what can we achieve? I mean, you know, there's so much hope resting on that, and what's realistic, and how can we make a difference?
Yeah, thank you. So you're right. This year is a really crucial year, with us hosting both the G7 talks in Cornwall in June, and then the COP, Conference of the Parties, the big UN climate talks in Glasgow in November. And I approach both of those with a mixture of both optimism and realism, which I think is a thoroughly Christian stance to take. So hopeful, because our hope is rooted in Christ, and we are called to push forward and to keep going and to keep working. And also realistic, because I have a pretty, I think, biblical understanding of sin and the human condition, and the reality that we so often fail and don't often meet our targets and meet the things that we want to do. But that doesn't deter us from pushing and from taking action both in our own lives and pushing our government and global other governments to take action. And we are seeing change. So yesterday, you might have missed it in the midst of all the other big news that happened. The two other big pieces that came out yesterday evening, but the government earlier yesterday announced, or I'll probably get this wrong, so having announced a target of 68% emissions by 2030, their next target is now that it will be 75% of emissions reduction by 2035. So this is a good next step on. Of course, there's all the detail as to how they'll actually do it and so on and so on, but still it's a good declaration. And sorry, what am I trying to say? What we need to do is push our governments to be living up to the promises that they made at the Paris Agreement. So these Glasgow talks would have been 5 years on, and these were the talks at which country leaders are bringing their plans for how they are going to actually concretely outwork the commitments that they made in Paris. At the moment, if you put all of the plans together, they don't add up to the reductions that we're needing to see. They still lead to something like a 3.1 degree warming world. So we're really needing governments to be upping their plans and coming with things that are much more ambitious. Tearfund is working on a report at the moment called Closing the Gap, which we'll be launching at some point, where we're working with an institute doing an analysis of the country plans that we know of so far and looking at what the gap is between where they are and what they should be and how that should be changed. So there'll be more coming out on that. The best thing, actually while I'm talking, could someone, Pete, maybe could you just Google Tearfund reboot campaign and find that link and put it in the chat?
Yeah, no problem. And I'll email it around afterwards as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Because that's got really good resources that will help you as your church engage this year. So the key thing is that together we are pushing on the government to be ambitious in its targets. Tearfund is working with Christian Aid, CAFOD, A Rocha, all, we've got big joint work things. Sorry, my brain's going. Lots of coordination that we're doing, all campaigning together. So please join the campaigns, join what you'll see in that link. Pray with us. Prayer is really important as well this year, and there's prayer mobilization happening. And let's be using our voices well for this opportunity that we've got this year. Brilliant, thank you.
Great question. Thank you, Ruth. Really keen to know what difference we can make as households, but also collectively, and our two parishes working more closely together on this, and ways that we can be stronger together and have a louder voice. So your first port of call will be the reboot campaign. Any other things that quickly come to mind on that?
Yeah, so if you look on that webpage, just off the top of my mind, it's got a really helpful little video that you could show at a church service that highlights actually it talks about Orbisa, the woman who I mentioned. And then further down, it's got resources. And some sample talks and things you could use and PowerPoint slides. One of the things I'd really highlight to you is the Climate Emergency Toolkit. So this is something that we, with the other organisations, have put together to be a resource for churches specifically for this year leading up to COP. So I'd have a look at that. And then something really different, and if you're wanting to have a bit of fun, maybe engage your younger people, do something a bit different. There's a Zoom escape room focused on the climate crisis, which I think might come up, should be there on that page as well. It's called Climate Silencer or something. And that would be a really fun thing for you to do together. You could do it on a coffee morning or do it with your young folk, or do it in your small groups, or however. But has that come up? I'm sorry, I haven't got it in front of me.
Yes, that people can click on that.
Right.
See all that.
And that would be just something a bit different to try.
Fantastic, thank you, Ruth. Conscious of your time, we got 5 minutes or so. Can we? Yeah.
Yeah.
Any hands up for other questions? Sophie, as our eco link, if you've got anything particular, wanted to give you a particular opportunity. Any questions for Ruth?
Thank you. I'll just have a quick think and then I'll.
Yeah, no problem.
No, you don't have to.
No. Nikki, yes, I think Nikki got in there. Go on then, Nikki, what's yours?
Ruth, you talked about your tea and the way you handle tea. I just wondered, on a personal note, in your home, because we're hearing now that homes are the problem and things that we do. Are there any other sort of practical tips that we could start tomorrow to save energy or save plastic, or what do you do in your daily routine?
Yeah, great, thank you. So when you start to look at this, it can look really confusing and really overwhelming. So I've boiled it down. I tend to boil it down in my thinking to 4 main areas, which is the food we eat, the way we travel, the energy we use, and the things we throw away, thinking, as you said, predominantly about plastic, but broadly around recycling, and remembering that reducing is the first step in that. So the food we eat, think about, is there one change that you could make in your diet that would make a difference? And the really obvious one there is to reduce the amount of meat and dairy that we consume. And that really is an important thing for us to do. Now, I'm not saying that we should all go vegetarian or all go vegan. And I'm also aware that we have some meat farmers who are really good and really care for their animals. So for those of us who do choose still to eat meat, let's make sure that we're doing it in a way that is supporting those farmers. But the primary thing is for us to be eating predominantly a vegetable and grain-based diet. And if we want to eat meat, maybe we eat meat once a week or a few times a month or something. So we really turn our diets on its head. And when we do eat meat, just eat a little bit. I can see some of your faces. If you are from a culture of being a hardened carnivore, and that just sounds terrible to you, take it gradually. Go for one day a week where you don't eat meat. And then when that feels a bit normal and you've realized that actually it's okay and it's not that difficult, then up it to 2 days a week and just take it gradually. Part of it actually is a psychological and a physical thing. It's a psychological thing of getting used to sort of changing what we think of when it comes to food. Part of it is a physical, biological thing about the biomes that are in our gut. And actually, this is very simplistic, I know, if any of you are biologists, but as you feed those biomes less meat, you get less meat desiring signals coming to your brain, and you begin over time naturally to find not to want to eat as much meat. I was a very hardened carnivore for about 10 years. We even kept pigs. And the thought of not eating meat, I just couldn't, it just absolutely beyond me. I do still sometimes eat meat. I'm what I guess you'd call me a flexitarian, but predominantly I don't, and I don't really ever cook it at home, and I don't really ever think about it anymore, which is an amazing thing. I never could have thought that would happen. So take it gradually. I think if you try and do it cold turkey, you might find that too difficult. So sorry, I've spent too long on that. And there's lots of other food related things as well, of course, but the primary thing is reducing the amount of meat and dairy we consume. Then thinking about how we get around. I know you're in a rural area, so I know you'll have challenges there, but thinking about how often you use your car, what sort of car you have. And the big thing is flying when we get back into a situation where we can fly. So let's think, can we reduce the amount of flying that we do? If we're used to an annual holiday, could we maybe fly on holiday every 5 years rather than every year, or just other things that we can do to reduce that and cut it down? and the energy we use. The simplest thing you can do here, as alongside all of the energy saving things, is to switch your energy provider to a green one. And that's so simple to do and will really make a difference. So it might be Octopus or Good Energy or Ecotricity. You can just do that so simply online. So switch your energy, make sure your energy is with a green energy supplier. And then plastic, or thinking about the things we throw away, lots to do there, but let's focus on single-use plastic and thinking what are the changes you could make in your home to be using as little single-use plastic as possible. I wonder if I can just grab it here. My L is for lifestyle is probably your go-to place for all of that. So do pick up a copy of that. You can just get it really easily online, and that will give you lots more. And it's not only about individual things. It looks at the advocacy and campaigning side too, but that would be a good place for you to find out more.
Really helpful, thank you. Really practical tips, small steps, starting out, doing what you know, the next thing that's coming before us, and then seeing where that takes us. Thank you so much. Really, Sophie, was there a question there?
Yes, it kind of related to the transport, the energy, and the food, because obviously we want to support fair trade, especially with poorer countries, but also with them. That means transporting to others. It's a sort of question of how often do we use the fair trade, or is it sort of try and use fair trade as well as local fair trade as well?
Yeah, and this is, so I've actually, there's a small chapter on it in here under Q. So this goes through the alphabet and takes an issue for each letter. K is for kippers and looks at issues of the C's and various things. But I won't go take you through the alphabet. But Q is for questions, because it's one of, I call it the green beans from Kenya question, because it is one of those questions that just really highlights the ethical dilemmas that we face sometimes, and highlights the fact that we live in a fallen world where we're not always going to be able to do everything perfectly. And sometimes there are choices. So sometimes it is a choice between local or supporting a farmer in another country. And so I'm quite a pragmatist, so I tend to kind of hedge my bets. And sometimes I do a bit of supporting all over the place. So we don't drink much meat, but when drink much milk, but when we do, sometimes I get a milkman delivery in a glass bottle, but I can't get organic, and so sometimes I will buy organic milk from the supermarket, because then I'm supporting the organic industry. That's all sounding very complicated, I know, but I think the aim is, if and when you, or not if, when you do buy from overseas, make sure that it's fairly traded or fair trade, or if it's Waitrose, then it's the Waitrose Foundation. So try your best whenever you're buying something from overseas that you're looking for the best alternative, the fair trade alternative. Support local wherever you can, and buy organic whenever you can. And then within that, there aren't hard and fast rules, but I would say if you're buying cheap beans from Tesco's, say, you're not hugely supporting the farmer, sadly. You're more supporting Tesco's system, and you're more supporting a system that is keeping the farmer beholden to the big conglomerates and needing to douse his land in a whole load of chemicals and cut down, you know, you're not supporting a brilliant system, though I do understand that you are supporting the farmer a bit. Sorry, I'm rambling. The best thing is to go for fair trade where you can. Okay, I'm going to pause there.
They're really helpful. It's really helpful. It's more
articulately expressed.
Yeah.
In Q in here.
I popped that in chat, and maybe somebody, I'm sure a number of us are going to want to get our hands on that, might be willing to read it and do us a book review in a church service, one of our services coming up. Do let me know if that might be something you'd be willing to do, just to give us some more insights and so forth. I think we're out. I know Ruth's got to be somewhere else, hopefully virtually at 11 o'clock. Just love to finish with us praying for you, and I've asked Nikki and Henry to just close in prayer. We'll stay on a bit longer, but I know Ruth's got to go, but just pray for yourself and the work that you're doing. So let's pray.
Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for Ruth. We thank you for the inspiration she's given us through her book, and even more so the inspiration by hearing her talk now. We pray that you'll bless her work in the future, and that she will be a catalyst for Christians all over this country to come together, all over the world even, and really join in with this saving the world as God would want us to.
Yes, Father, and I just pray in the bigger picture, pray for these events, the G7 meeting and the COP meeting in Glasgow. Father, I just pray that you will help us to, and especially Ruth and Tearfund, to influence the politicians, to realize and understand how seriously we all take these issues, not just as a personal thing, but from a biblical perspective too, Father. And I just pray for those meetings, that there will be a real sense of coming together and a real sense of urgency amongst all those attending. Please bless those people attending, give them some real wisdom and foresight. And I just pray again for Tearfund, for Ruth, and for all those involved in influencing those politicians. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Wonderful. Ruth, thank you. I can't thank you enough. It's been so helpful, insightful, a catalyst for all of us, I'm sure. And keep up the good work. We will be in touch and let you know how we're taking things forward. And,
yes, I
thank
look
you so
forward
much
to hearing about the bronze.
Thank you for all that you're doing. Keep up the good work.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Have a good morning.
Thank you. Let's give Ruth a big round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. Bye now. And I'll just stop the recording if I can. Tim's, please don't dash off.